Not all cracks are visible right away. Some open slowly, between habits and silences. This is how my story began, not with a stolen kiss, but with the absence of everything else. My name is Maria. I am 44 years old, and I have been married to Massimo for 15 years now. Together we have built what, in the eyes of others, seems like a perfect life. A house in the suburbs, 2 children, 2 cars, a well-kept garden, and even a small vegetable patch where Massimo loves to spend the hours planting salad and tomatoes. An impeccable picture, one might say. Yet behind those tidy walls, a deaf silence had long crept in, a void, a distance. Sign up if you want to find out how dangerous desire can become. In recent years, Massimo had changed. Colder, absent, closed in on himself. Every day he came home carrying the weight of something he no longer shared with me. No smile, no gesture, only tiredness and that routine that seemed to have turned him off inside. I, on the other hand, still had within me that need for closeness, for complicity, to feel desired, and the more he moved away, the more I got lost in thoughts that I never thought I would welcome. With the children at school and the days increasingly empty, I began to take care of the house differently. I was looking for something to fill that sense of lack that was eating away at me. So when the kitchen started having problems, I took matters into my own hands. I contacted a renovation company, and that's how I met Fabrizio. 35 years old, physique sculpted by work, a clear gaze and a smile that seemed to get under the skin. His arrival was like a sudden breeze in a room that had been closed for too long. He brought with him a light, vital energy. He spoke to me kindly, answered my questions calmly without ever appearing annoyed. And every gesture, every word seemed enveloped in a disarming naturalness. It all started with short exchanges, but soon the conversations became longer, more intimate. He told me about his passions, about hiking in the mountains, about the sacrifices he made to open his business. I listened to him enraptured, but it was in the way he listened to me that I felt something awaken. He didn't interrupt me. He didn't judge me. It made me feel seen. Every day when he left, I was left with a strange feeling, a subtle, hidden desire that was growing. It wasn't just attraction. It was the desperate need to feel alive. Then there was that morning, a rainy day, gray and silent. Fabrizio arrived early, slightly tired, but with his usual smile that managed to melt me inside. I offered him a hot coffee and we sat in the kitchen. It was a moment suspended in time, with the sound of rain on the windows as the only soundtrack. His words reached straight to the heart. He talked about his childhood, the difficulties he overcame. I looked at him, and in those eyes I found a connection that I hadn't felt in years. Time slipped away, and when I realized it was almost time for lunch, I suggested we stay. He agreed, and something in me lit up. Preparing him to eat gave me a feeling of intimacy that I hadn't felt in a long time, and while we ate, we observed each other in silence. Long looks, breaths held, a subtle tension that grew with every glance. No contact, no words out of place, but inside me, a river. In the following days, I awaited his arrival with sweet anxiety. Every morning, that flannel shirt, those worn jeans, and that way of looking at me as if he knew exactly what was happening inside me. Massimo, my husband, noticed something. He asked me why I was happier. I replied to him with an excuse. I talked about the house, some work. But the truth was another. I was flourishing again, and not for a new piece of furniture or a redone kitchen. Fabrizio worked with an almost sensual precision. Every movement, every touch on objects, on walls, seemed to have an intention. He involved me in the choices, as if my opinion really mattered. It was a simple gesture, but for me full of meaning. Massimo no longer looked at me that way. He didn't ask me anything anymore. With Fabrizio, on the other hand, every exchange was like touching without touching. We talked about dreams, about desires that had remained locked in a drawer. With him, I confessed thoughts that I didn't even know I had. One cold morning, among dust and utensils, I prepared some tea. The kitchen was a mess, but we laughed. It was a warm, spontaneous laugh. One of those that open your stomach, and in that moment I knew that I wanted to be there with him, in the midst of chaos, with that scent of tea and paint in the air. I told him about my dream of becoming a photographer, a forgotten dream. He listened to me carefully, without laughing, without minimizing. He wanted to know more, and in that exchange something came to life. Something I had buried. I promised to show him my old shots. Just the idea of sharing them with him gave me shivers. Every morning, when I opened that door, I felt my heart beat faster. It wasn't just him who came in. It was the desire, the possibility. Every step, every word, every look was charged with restrained electricity. No kisses, no caresses, and yet it was as if we had already touched each other 1,000 times, in silence, without lifting a finger. Time warped. The hours passed as if in a dream. I knew it couldn't last, that secret world of unsaid words and sighs would sooner or later collapse. But until then, I just wanted to stay there, suspended in that moment where everything was still possible and nothing had really been betrayed yet, except perhaps my heart. Every evening when Fabrizio crossed the gate and walked away along the driveway, I remained there, motionless on the threshold, watching him disappear into the dim light. It was as if a part of me also went away with him, a part that I had rediscovered after a long time and that I no longer wanted to let go of. I slowly went back into the house, but my mind remained outside with him. I stared into space for minutes, sometimes hours, invaded by thoughts that scratched at me inside. The heart could not find peace. And as the weeks went by, I realized that my entire day revolved around him. I woke up with a sweet agitation, a hidden frenzy that made me come alive. Even just seeing him tinker with the tools, hearing his voice recount real-life episodes, was enough for me to feel desired again, even if only in my imagination. It wasn't just his body that enchanted me, but that masculine, raw, spontaneous energy, a way of life without masks, which I had forgotten existed. Massimo, meanwhile, seemed more distant every day. He came back late, nervous, and when he was there, it was as if he wasn't there. The dinners were silent, cold. I tried to talk to him, but he closed himself off, as if it wasn't even worth discussing. I felt a terrible void. I was fighting alone for something that perhaps he had already let go of some time ago. And while Massimo passed away, Fabrizio became more present every day, careful, receptive. A fleeting glance from me was enough for him to realize that something was wrong. One day, when I was more withdrawn than usual, he gave me a look that seemed to embrace me. He didn't say much, but there was more listening in his gestures than in 1,000 words. In that silence, a new intimacy was created, deep, a complicity made of glances, touches, small attentions. I was no longer looking for a man. I was looking for understanding, closeness, vibration. and Fabrizio unknowingly was giving them all to me. One afternoon, while he was finishing painting, he proposed something that surprised me, an excursion to the mountains, just the two of us. He said nature gave him peace, and his simplicity, the way he told me, disarmed me. A conflict opened up inside me. On the one hand, the desire to escape with him, even just for a day, leaving everything behind. On the other, the weight of a role that I had worked so hard to build. Mother, wife, responsible woman. I told him I would think about it. He smiled at me, a soft, respectful smile that made me feel free to choose. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the possibility of experiencing something that, until recently, I wouldn't have even considered. Was it really so wrong to want a breather, an escape? Or maybe it was just life knocking again, loudly. If something in you has moved listening to this story, then stay. Press sign up and let yourself be tempted again, one story at a time. Every time I looked at it, in the following days, the desire became stronger. There was something about him that attracted me like a magnet, a sensual, unostentatious energy that slipped under my skin without me realizing it. And as this attraction grew, so did the guilt. Massimo was still there, and yet it wasn't. But precisely that tension, that subtle game between morality and passion, made every meeting with Fabrizio even more charged. One afternoon, as I stood next to him to better observe the finished work, I realized how close we were. I could feel his breathing, the heat of his body, and in that instant my heart skipped a beat. Our hands barely touched, a touch that lasted less than a second, but it was enough to start a fire inside me. Nobody took the first step. But our eyes spoke to each other for a long time. I felt that if I let go of all resistance, I would lose myself completely in him. But no one moved. We remained suspended, on the edge of a precipice we both knew well. That evening, after he left, I sat there for a long time. Every detail of that moment came back to me, like a slow shiver that wouldn't go away. The next morning was different. The air was charged, tense. I had an agitation inside that I couldn't explain. The thought of him devoured me. We both knew we were too close to the edge now. And when he arrived, it only took a moment to understand that he too had spent the night thinking. His gestures, always confident, were now slower, more careful, like he was walking on thin glass. That day was a silent dance. Every touch felt like a held scream. Every look a forbidden bite. When it was time for the break, I made the coffee as always, but my hands were shaking. Inside me, the chaos was total. I was on the verge of giving up, and we both knew it. As I poured the coffee, I felt my hands shaking. The gestures, which seemed automatic to me every day, had something different that time. Fabrizio was behind me, and I felt his gaze like warmth sliding down my spine. Then something happened that took my breath away. His hand rested on mine, firm and sure, but also incredibly delicate, a gesture that alone was enough to break every barrier I had built. We looked at each other, and in that look there was no longer room for hesitation. All the questions, all the reflections that had held me back until a moment before, dissolved. Only desire remained, raw, live, uncontrollable. His hand began to move slowly over mine, as if he were exploring sacred territory. He didn't say anything. There was no need. He approached slowly, centimeter by centimeter, and I felt my breathing getting shorter and shorter. The warmth of his face so close to mine enveloped me. When his lips touched mine, an entire world that I had kept hidden inside me exploded. I responded to his kiss with a passion I didn't think I still had inside. It was instinctive, overwhelming, almost brutal in its sincerity. There were no more thoughts, only sensations. His hands looking for me, his body coming closer to mine, and me finally stopping resisting. It was much more than just a physical meeting. It was a need, an urgency that came from a deep void. With him, I felt naked, but not only in my body, naked in the soul, without masks, without having to pretend, totally myself. We moved towards the sofa as if guided by a force that left us no escape. Every gesture was a liberation. Each caress dissolved months, years of silences, of shortcomings. There was no guilt, there was no restraint, just the need to live there all the way. We remained hugged afterwards, our bodies still warm, our breaths slowly becoming slower. Nobody said anything. No words were needed. That silence had the flavor of a peace that I hadn't felt for too long. I realized how much I needed to feel like this. Desired, seen, listened to, and understood. When he stood up and looked at me, there was a sweetness in his eyes that went beyond attraction. A deep bond born in the forbidden, but which had within it a truth that we could no longer pretend to ignore. He touched my face and left a kiss on my forehead. A simple gesture, but so full of emotion that it made me tremble and cry. That evening, I stayed on the sofa for a long time. The body was still shaken, the mind confused. Emotions overlapped like waves. On the one hand, the joy of feeling alive, a woman again. On the other, the weight of what I had done. I had crossed a limit that I had always thought was inviolable. And yet, I couldn't regret it, because what I had experienced was real. It was a response to a hunger that I had carried inside me for too long. In the following days, Fabrizio's thoughts became constant. All you had to do was close your eyes to relive every moment. It was like a refuge, a secret place in my mind to return to in moments of solitude. But soon that initial lightness gave way to something darker. Guilt crept in between the silences with Massimo. I felt invaded by questions that I didn't have the courage to even say to myself. Fabrizio continued to come to the house to finish the work, but everything had changed between us. Talking had become more difficult. Not because we didn't want to, but because we knew that there was no longer room for what we had experienced. Yet, every time our eyes met, it only took a moment to feel that that bond was still there. Live, real, indelible. One morning, while I was tidying up the kitchen, Massimo surprised me. He looked at me with a different look. It was the first time in a long time that he had sincerely asked me how I was. It caught me unprepared. Emotions overlapped. Guilt, fear, shame. I'd just told him that I felt alone, neglected. No details were needed. Those few words were enough to trigger something. Massimo began to change. Slowly, without proclamations. Small gestures, longer looks, presences that weren't there before. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. And perhaps, deep down, precisely what had happened with Fabrizio had been the jolt we needed to wake up. Fabrizio, in the meantime, finished the work. He left as he arrived, discreetly. But that final look, that was everything. Long, full of everything we hadn't said. There were no promises, no illusions, just the knowledge that we had shared something true, and that had changed us both. Over time, the memory became less poignant, but it never completely disappeared. Fabrizio remained inside me like a secret, a whisper that resurfaced every now and then. And every time I thought about it, I felt like I owed him something. Because thanks to him, I understood what was missing in my life. And I had the courage to look inside myself. Sometimes, mistakes are just the most painful way life asks us to wake up. If you want to receive new videos of the series, write, "I want the sequel" in the comments. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive a preview of future publications. Thank you.